Thank you for joining us today on avoiding discrimination in a fair housing complaint. I'm Laura Prouse with Crest Insurance Services, and today we welcome attorney James Myers from Chartwell Law. James has been defending real estate professionals throughout Florida for more than a decade and is a very active member of the Crest legal panel. Along with James, we have Dave Miller, Regional Vice President with Fidelity National Home Warranty. Dave manages the Crest Advantage Home Warranty Plan that ties in with Crest's E&O insurance. We have a lot to cover, so Dave, I'll let you get started.
Oh, Laura, thanks so much for having us. Jim, thank you for joining us today from the great state of Florida there. We have some great information for our real estate professionals in Florida. And Jim, we're going to talk today about a risk management piece that you put out regarding the Fair Housing Act. Now, obviously, you know this, but correct me if I'm wrong, this has been an issue and has been out for 30, 40 years. Why are we talking about this today? And what issues are still going on with the Fair Housing Act?
Yeah, good morning. Good morning, Dave and Laura. The Fair Housing Act was passed back in 1968. It was basically a follow-up to the Civil Rights Act of 1964. And its purpose is to prohibit discrimination in housing based upon sex, religion, or national origin. It's administered by Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD. And where we are today is in 2016, HUD came out through its Office of General Counsel, some guidelines regarding criminal background screening for housing applicants. That housing providers can find themselves in trouble based upon discrimination. The goal essentially is to provide a meaningful second chance for people with criminal backgrounds to reintegrate into society. And in order to do that, access to housing is an essential component of that. And where this comes from is unfortunately the African American and Hispanic community. They are arrested, charged, and convicted and incarcerated in disproportionate levels as compared to the rest of the population. So this creates problems with criminal screening that where housing providers have blanket prohibitions for any criminal background activity. It creates a disparate impact on those groups of people. So that's what those guidelines address.
Interesting. So what typical lawsuits are you seeing regarding fair housing that are coming across your firm's desk there?
The problem that housing providers, and by that I mean property managers, real estate brokers, or anyone else who advertise for housing, is putting into an advertisement words such as clean criminal background required or no felonies required. Those can be considered unlawful discrimination right on their face. And what's important to note is that's even if there is no intent whatsoever to discriminate. Intention doesn't matter. Under the law, blanket prohibition of any criminal background does have a disparate impact. Criminal background screening can be done, but where it becomes unlawful is if it fails to distinguish conduct that indicates a risk to the housing provider, such as resident safety, or does not consider is considered a risk to the housing provider. So for example, a DUI conviction that's 15 years old is very, very different than, say, someone who is a violent criminal sex offender or something like that that's just been released. Those things have to be distinguished. But housing providers can run into trouble and will run into trouble and liability when they have these blanket prohibitions, because the other point that unfortunately exists, but it's part of the law, the accepted case law, is testers are even allowed. These are people who can test an advertisement even if they have no actual intention of renting or being provided that housing. And so if they look up an ad and see that it says no criminal background permitted, they can contact the say the broker or agent and say, is this true? And if the agent says, yes, that's true, that in and of itself can create liability and create a lawsuit that the broker will lose under the established law.
Interesting. So let me put you on the spot here. Do you feel that Florida's Department of Real Estate is doing a good job with the Fair Housing Act and maybe with forms and disclosures that they're having the real estate professionals use, or is there still a hole somewhere?
I think there's probably a hole, but this really extends beyond Florida because we're talking essentially federal case law. So this would actually apply, I believe, to more states, even though I only practice in Florida. I believe these lawsuits and the case law have been developed through federal courts in places like New York and other states. So this could be a problem, really in any state. And it's something that I think all real estate professionals really need to be aware of.
Well, that's great information, but let's talk a little bit more about the nuts and bolts here for our real estate professionals, whether on the listing side or the selling side. What do the real estate agents and real estate professionals need to know with regards to the Fair Housing Act and applying it to their transactions?
I think the important thing to remember and the important thing that they need to do is to not have any kind of blanket prohibitions on criminal conduct. Something generic like background check required. And if, say, a homeowners association or a landlord, wants to say to them, we don't want any criminal background at all, put that in your advertisement, they need to be told, well, under the law, what I can do for you is say background check required. And then they're going to be more safe because once the application comes in, they will be looking at more than just a criminal background check. They will also be looking at things like credit scores. And maybe they don't even have to get into an analysis of, what sort of criminal record is this? Is it something that I can consider and disqualify the person, or is this something that we should be careful about not discriminating against? Perhaps I would think that most people with a pretty severe or dangerous criminal background record probably also have a bad credit score, so that can be used to disqualify, an applicant that may be less desirable to have in a given community. Also, brokers should really have an internal written policy that employees and agents who are involved in the advertising and screening of applicants, should understand and follow in terms of this. They need to educate their landlords and homeowners associations as to the law that an arrest record is not justification because lots of people are arrested and not convicted. So, for example, an arrest on a felony charge but no conviction is not grounds to disqualify someone.
Gotcha. Are you seeing in these real estate transactions that one side is more vulnerable to a Fair Housing Act claim? Is it more the listing side or the buyer's side?
It's the listing side. Those who advertise for rentals are what we're seeing.
Okay.
It's mostly the rental market. Condominium associations, homeowners associations, individual landlords who want to rent a property. Naturally, people want clean records. They want someone safe and so forth in their property as a tenant. But brokers and agents just have to step carefully with this because it can create liability if they're not.
Now, we've talked about agents, and you just brought up a good point with properties that people rent. Talk about maybe property managers and maybe Airbnbs. Does this now apply to all of that industry as well?
Yeah, because under the law, it just says housing providers. So it doesn't distinguish between condominium associations or Airbnb or sellers or renters or landlords of individual homes. It just says housing providers.
That's great. Anything else that you would like to advise the listeners out here? You wrote a great risk management piece, and it's on the Crest website for them to view. But anything else to tie in everything that we've talked about already?
It's important once a background check is run that it's a good way to avoid discriminatory practice is to really examine each applicant on a one-by-one basis. Evaluate each one individually. Make sure that everyone is treated the same. If some sort of criminal conviction would disqualify an African American, but they feel it wouldn't for a non-African American or a white person, I mean that's a big no-no. So they need to be cautious in terms of really making sure that applicants are evaluated on an individualized basis, case-by-case basis. And I believe also in the piece that was published, there's actually a reference to the Office of General Counsel guidance. And I think it's a good idea for at least brokers to read it, to pull it up. It's available on a website, and then develop some internal procedures for their agents to follow. Because I know a lot of brokers have multiple dozens and dozens of agents, and something that's published internally will really help keep them out of trouble.
So for those that are a little bit newer to this and maybe that are really cautious about not making sure to have a Fair Housing Act, would you recommend they have maybe a personal attorney review the files, or what do you recommend there so that they have that level of risk management to avoid something like this down the road?
I think they could, but really it's just important to make sure that you don't have advertisements where we're seeing the cases are advertisements that have those blanket prohibitions. The important thing is to just say all you can say in an advertisement, and all you can tell any applicant who calls up is that yes, the landlord or the property manager is requiring a background check, and in addition to a credit check, or a work history check, or other things that landlords often require. Once that's done, they're pretty much they're safe from being targeted by what we call testers, for one thing, and that in and of itself is a tremendous elimination or reduction of risk.
Well, I tell you, this is great information. I know, like you said, it's been around since the 60s, but it is a hot topic again, and we appreciate you joining us today and writing the risk management piece for all of the CREST members. It's on the CREST E&O website. In the risk management department, and great information. Jim, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you. Anytime.
Laura, back to you.
Thank you both. Very, very informative, great information to have. And for those of you who are watching, this webinar is available on the CREST Insurance homepage under the Claim Prevent blog. We'll see you soon.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.